Hey class, it's Mr. LaRose, and this is another lesson from our Africana Studies course. Today's lesson will be about African innovations, which includes inventions and practices that were developed in Africa. We'll learn about both historic as well as more recent um, developments that came from Africa. To start, I want to say that Africa has long been thought of as a very isolated and static continent where there's not been many technological advances, and many people view it as like a slum or a jungle where not much really happens, but that's very far from the truth. Africa is home to the world's most ancient civilizations, and we are all direct descendants of ancestors that came from the African continent. Um, Africans have shaped their world with the technology they developed, and in turn have shaped the larger world as well. It is believed that the modern human, the Homo sapiens, originated from the Great Rift Valley of Africa approximately 200,000 years ago. This valley is 3,000 miles long and extends from Ethiopia to Malawi, and there is proven evidence to show that this is the source of the human race. In 1997, in Ethiopia, a human skull named Idaltu was discovered, and it is the oldest human skull, modern human skull ever found, and it is approximated to be about 160,000 years old, which so far proves that modern humans emerged in Africa. And it is believed that about 80,000 years ago, these humans began to spread out of Africa into Europe and Asia and through the rest of the world to what we know today. Um, in 1991, in Blombo's cave, there were the first signs of human creativity and art were discovered. Before this, um, the discoveries in the Lascaux caves in France were the oldest, at approximately 30 to 35,000 years ago, compared to Blombo's discoveries, which dated to 90 to 100,000 years ago, which is a very big difference and proves that Africa is the origin of human creativity. In this cave, they found stones with etchings on them that they believe could possibly have been used as stamps. And that shows that people were able to move past just the basic needs of survival, like food, shelter, and water, and were actually able to use their energy and resources to express themselves. And they believe this is the start of human creativity and culture. And there was also found in this cave supplies for making paint, which again is one of the first signs of artwork and human expression and creativity. So moving on, about 10,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert, which we know today as one of the largest deserts in the world, full of nothing but sand dunes, 10,000 years ago, it was actually a lush environment with many animals and resources for Africans to survive on. Um, and eventually, Africans evolved and were able to begin farming and raising livestock. We know this as the Neolithic Revolution, when we started moving from nomadic, moving around, hunting gatherers, to settling down and raising livestock and farming to be able to support yourself. This allowed populations to grow and groups to get larger. This allowed for separate careers for people. So there would be farmers supplying food and animals to eat, and this allowed other people to become artisans and gain skills to express themselves, and this allowed for the production of arts and technology and formation of culture and not just trying to stay alive. Um, Another discovery was in 1988 at Abydos in Egypt, in a ruler's tomb known as the Scorpion King. There was a discovery of ivory tags carved with symbols. This is believed to be one of the very first signs of human writing in the world, and this happened in Africa. Another example of proving that Africa is the home of very important technological advances. Obviously, writing is very important. Um, these tags were dated to around 3250 BC and are a very early form of hieroglyphics, and I'll show you guys a picture of these. Um, Many people believe writing began in Mesopotamia in the Middle East with their form of writing, cuneiform. There's a lot of controversy as to which came first, these early hieroglyphics on these ivory tags or the Mesopotamian cuneiform. It is believed that they developed around the same time, possibly these early hieroglyphics a little earlier, but it's clear that they developed at totally independent of each other. So that shows that Africa um, developed on its own without very much outside influence. Um, these writings that were found on these tags, like, can easily be seen that writing allowed rulers to keep records of their civilizations, as well as write down written rules, which allowed them to control their civilizations, which allowed them to grow larger and more powerful, and allowed for more of these developments to occur. Another very important development, many developments in Africa, was mathematics. Um, Africans, particularly Egyptians, were some of the first to successfully develop an understanding of basic as well as advanced mathematics and put it to use for many different things. Documents such as the Rhind and Moscow mathematical papyruses, which are pieces of paper, very old, um, have been found and date to around 2000, 1500 BC, and it proves that Egyptians had a very complex understanding of mathematics and their use. I'll show you guys a picture of these too. Um, these papers prove that the Egyptian understanding of mathematics was very complex, and they could do many basic math operations, including they knew basic four operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, but they also had a very good understanding of fractions, and they could calculate volumes of boxes as well as pyramids. And also they had an understanding of surface area of many three-dimensional shapes, even spheres, which are very complex. There's also evidence that they understood the basics of the Pythagorean theorem, which involves triangles and geometry, which I'm sure many of you have learned in math, and if not, you will very soon when you take trigonometry. Um, it's some very complex stuff that they um, implemented in many different ways. Um, One of these is the development of architecture, most notably the Great Pyramids of Giza. Um, this understanding of geometry allowed them to build these monuments very accurately and efficiently, and they created some of the greatest monuments in ancient history as well as today. Um, Along with that, we move into developments of astrology, which involves space and stars and all of those objects. Um, Many astrological and timekeeping innovations were first developed in Africa. Um, One of those, possibly the world's first astrological device, was a stone circle found to be created by the Nubians, and it's dated to around 4800 BC. And these stone circles are thought to be a landmark created to line up with astrological objects in the sky to mark the summer solstice, which is very important for telling dates as well as farming and stuff like that. Um, the Egyptians in Africa were also the first to develop a true 365-day, 12-month calendar that we use today, and it was created by observing patterns in the stars. Um, those were very ancient historical discoveries, but in more modern history, South Africa is the home of the Southern African Large Telescope, which is currently the largest telescope in the Southern Hemisphere. And I'll also show you guys a picture of that. And this shows how Africa is the home of many historic developments, but it continues to have great developments nowadays, and they still are advancing today. Also going to talk about many medicinal innovations that came from Africa, um, and many modern medicinal practices were first developed in ancient Africa. Um, as Africans, particularly Egyptians, had a very good understanding of the human anatomy and how it worked, as they did many studies and experiments on the human body, um, both dead and alive with slaves and the deceased. Um, it is believed that the first medical surgery was actually performed in Africa around 2750 BC. Um, and few of these practices, several of the countless medical procedures that were first performed in Africa include vaccinations against numerous different diseases. Um, they performed autopsies on bodies to figure out the cause of death and also to study the organs and how they operate. Um, they were also the first to set broken bones to allow them to heal correctly. Is a home of the first brain surgery. They also developed skin grafting, which is taking a piece of skin from one part of the body and or a deceased person's body onto a injured area of someone else. They're also the first to develop the filling of dental cavities as well as installation of false teeth. They were also the first to do what is now known as a cesarean section or a C-section, which is the removal of a child. unnaturally by cutting open and removing the child. They were also the first to study and develop anesthesia, putting people under to perform surgeries um, without them being awake. And also tissue cauterization, which is burning tissue to stop it from bleeding excessively. Um, these are many of the countless developments that came out of Africa, which shows their advanced understanding of the human body and the way it works. Um, in more recent history, which shows how Africa continues to develop, um, was the development of the CAT scan in 1967 by Alan Cormack, who was a South African physicist, and he developed the mathematical technique to allow the CAT scan to work. In these machines, it's almost like an X-ray or MRI, and it allows you to see inside the body and see what's going on so they can fix it. Um, Also occurring in 1967 was the world's very first heart transplant, which occurred in Cape Town in South Africa by a doctor named Chris Bernard. And this was a widely important event in history and allowed the practice of heart transplants to spread across the world and is obviously much more advanced now and much more successful. Um, so all of these developments show that Africa is not this rundown jungle where there's these cave people who are uneducated and unadvanced. It is actually a very complex continent, and ancient African civilizations have produced some of the world's most important innovations, inventions, and practices that allow us to do many of the things we do today. Um, Africa has been proven through these discoveries I talked about earlier to be the cradle of modern mankind and Homo sapiens. And not only does the modern human trace its roots back to Africa, but also much of its culture, these innovations, all of this technology, and it is home to some of the greatest developments this world has ever seen in both ancient history as well as modern times. So I hope you guys found this lesson very interesting. Um, I wanted to show you guys some really cool developments that I thought you'd be interested in, and hopefully this makes you more interested in Africana studies and that you go out on your own to learn more about this awesome stuff. So tomorrow we will be having another one of our lessons. So I'll see you guys then.